We're here at Lodge CC at the High Rise Village site, and this is Matt Stirn. Matt and I have been excavating together since he was 13 years old. He volunteered at a site near his home in Jackson, Wyoming. He's about to start a master's program at the University of Sheffield in England. A couple years ago, Matt came up with a Geographic Information System model that correctly predicted the location of alpine villages. And I'd like to get Matt talking about that for the record.
Yeah, absolutely. This kind of all spawned, this idea to do this spawned simultaneously with myself and another graduate student who was working here at High Rise at the time, named Oren Koenig. And actually it spawned in another alpine village, which is located about 5 miles right behind the cameras. And we had spent 2 summers working here at High Rise and had an absolutely wonderful time. And a few years before that, Rich had discovered a site that just seemed really reminiscent of one of these alpine villages, but because we hadn't officially discovered an alpine village here in the Winds, we weren't sure if that's exactly what it was. And so as soon as we could, we went up and looked, and it was Rich, myself, Brian, who recently spoke on camera, and then Oren. And we went up there and actually did determine that it was a very similar village to what we have here at High Rise. But more interesting was that it was located on an identical topographical, geographical, and ecological spot as here on. In other words, it was basically the same site, but 5 miles to the south of us. And also around that time we found one more village nearby. And once again, the same exact thing. And these attributes that kind of connect all these sites, they're all located at a particular elevation right above tree line between 10,500 and 11,500 feet. They're in areas of high solar radiation, meaning they get a lot of sun, and they're all on slopes, anywhere between 10 all the way up to 30%. So the bunny slopes all the way up to a double black ski run, for those of you who do that. And they were all identical. It really just seemed too much to be a coincidence. And we'd found these 3 major villages we found all had 20+ lodge pads, but in the midst of doing some exploring and surveying, we found numerous other features, some little clusters of lodge pads, 2 or 3, maybe one by itself. And once again, all of those were exactly the same location. And so where I did my undergraduate degree at Davidson College, there was a professor there who did work in Central America using GIS, or Geographic Information Systems, which is basically a computerized way of displaying lots of spatial information. Google Earth, for example, or Google Maps, for example, is a good end product of what a GIS product or project can do. And we wanted to see if there is I wanted to see if there was a pattern associated with these topographic environments and these variables that we were noticing being similar between all these villages. So in essence, I created a computer program that took all of these attributes, the elevation, the exposure to sunlight, the slope, and looked at where in the Wind River Range these all existed in one location. And we assumed that if this pattern that we predicted would be correct, then that there should theoretically be more alpine villages located in these areas. So in essence, we created a big map that had little red spots all over it. And those red spots represented the highest likely locations that we thought, based on this model, new villages should be. And that next summer, with a little help from Davidson College and the Explorers Club, we launched 2 trips about 10 to 20 miles south of here into a completely new drainage to see if it worked. And we found 15 new village type sites. And by village type sites, I mean anything from one lodge by itself to some pretty big ones, 10 or more. And to our luck, every year, maybe not to our luck, but they worked with the model, and that every single one of these once again fell into an area that predictive model said that they should be. And so at that point, we realized there really is a pattern with these sites here in the Winds, and they're kind of a spattering of age ranges, some going back to early, late prehistoric, some more historic with metal artifacts in them. But it really seems to show that these village locations were chosen very intentionally and very specifically. And after doing some more playing around with the variables, these ecological niches that these villages are located in are actually, it seems to be chosen specifically for the highest producing white bark pine areas. And not only the highest producing white bark pine stands in the Winds, but these village sites are located within the most producing parts of the still living forests. So not only were they specifically choosing pine forests to live in, but they were locating the areas within those forests that produced the most nuts at one time. And there's definitely still some more work that needs to be done on this, but this seems to show, at least with pretty good confidence right now, that these villages were chosen, and the sites were chosen for very particular reasons around whitebark pine nut harvesting.
That's right. And even in places where there are currently no whitebark pines growing, there are still some village sites, but there is evidence in the form of ghost forests that there used to be whitebark pine stands right there. And that's really a fascinating thing, because we've got a paleoecological indicator that shows that tree line for whitebark pines has dropped about 300 feet in the past 800 years or so. And incontrovertible evidence that A, prehistoric Native Americans were harvesting whitebark pines, and B, whitebark pine stands have dropped in elevation at least 300 feet, maybe more, in the past 800 years. So got a lot of potential there, and Matt's program really did a great service by actually quantifying the parameters and identifying the one key one, that being, I think, whitebarks.
And what did you, into your model, did you integrate sheep proximity or
I tried.
hunting of other sorts?
Originally I did look at that, and I tried. There's actually a lot of data that existed from people who were studying bighorn sheep and also elk migrations up here in the winds, and I tried to look at proximity to that. And what I found was that a lot of them are in close proximity to that, but I think it was less intentional, and more so that at tree line and big open meadows in the winds where these whitebark pine forests happen to grow, you're going to find a lot of big animals anyways. I do think that they were definitely intentionally hunting bighorn sheep up here, but I think probably during the late prehistoric period there was no lack of them, and so it was more just being up here and less of specifically choosing a location, because they were just everywhere.
What we're finding is that most of the villages are not that far from the lowlands, from a potential winter camp. They're only about a long day's walk, which makes sense, because if you're going to transport all those whitebark pine nuts to your winter camp, you don't want to have to tote them for 3 or 4 days, because then it's not that much of a great trade-off in terms of energy efficiency. And we're talking, for the most part, pre-horse people there. So here we are at High Rise, and it's basically a 3-hour walk to a place where you could spend the winter. I think that was a draw too. But will be interesting as we go farther deeper into the winds, which we're going to do later this summer, to see if the pattern still holds. It seems to. It seems to still hold.
And what about in the Jackson area? Have you found things there?
Well, there is a videotape that Rosemary made for the wiki-ups, and in there Jamie Shane is talking on camera and showing this one area where there was a standing wiki-up, and all of us are convinced that there's a village there. I haven't been to it, but it's like, whoa, we all said the exact same thing. There's a village there. So possibly where you find big dense stands of whitebarks, I expect you will find villages. It maybe in the Absarokas a little bit. It's a little bit harder to see there. We found, well, there's Boulder Ridge, the complex up there with several villages, and then on the east fork of the Wind River, there is what appears to be a very small village of just a couple lodges. The signature isn't as strong there, but then again, the whitebark pines aren't as concentrated. Here, this is a monoculture. There, at this altitude, there's nothing but whitebark pines, and in the Absarokas, there's whitebark pine and subalpine fir and things like that. So, it's where you get monoculture of whitebark pines.